Welcome everybody to Monster Monday. My name is DM Galabond, and once again, I'm on vacation. So, this Monster Monday is being pre recorded for your enjoyment. All right, today on Monster Monday, we are going to be taking a look at the Strixhaven faculty. And faculty of Strixhaven come to us out of the Strixhaven campaign. And there are listed within the campaign, there are listed professors and deans. And these come from both dean cards and professor cards in Magic the Gathering. Now, there does seem to be a bit of a difference between what they consider a dean and a professor in the Magic the Gathering game. However, in the Strixhaven D&D campaign, they only give us one stat block for each kind of professor. And every college has this duality to it. And that is reflected going back again to the Strixhaven Magic the Gathering expansion, as we will see, with the way they created the Dean cards in that expansion. So that is a theme that carries over to the D&D campaign. But within each college, there are only two stat blocks for faculty, and they are deans and professors, and those stat blocks share the same thing, regardless of the title that a person has that you may see in the campaign. So let's go ahead and take a look at how that works. So the origins of the college faculty, there are 5 two-sided dean cards in the Strixhaven expansion, 10 characters in all. And two-sided cards are something that were introduced in Magic after the days that I played. I've said several times that I actively played Magic up until probably 97, maybe early 98, something like that. And there were never any two-sided cards at those times. So I'm not completely sure how that mechanic works, why those were introduced, what they thought they were doing when they brought that in. Uh, they are considered legendary creatures, and as far as I understand, legendary creatures in Magic the Gathering means you can only have one of that kind of card in your deck. And with a two-sided card, I don't even know if it's legal to put one of those in your deck, because obviously when you're shuffling the cards, everybody's going to see that you have something that doesn't have a standard back on it. So I don't really know what that's all about. But there are rules about when and how you can flip over the Magic the Gathering cards. I don't go into all that kind of stuff because this is not a Magic the Gathering channel. There's plenty of people that are gurus about Magic the Gathering, and if you want to know more rules about them, you should go check out those channels. Now, there's also a number of named professor cards and some unnamed professor cards in the Strixhaven School of Mages expansion for Magic the Gathering. Additionally, in some of the commander decks that were released in 2021, there are several named professor cards that show up in the Strixhaven D&D campaign. So I have included them in this week's roster. Because it's always nice to have different ideas to pull from, especially when you go about reskinning monsters for your own homebrew D&D campaign. Now, last and certainly not least, there is at least one Planeswalker card that appears in the Strixhaven expansion. And this is the character of Liliana Voss, who originally came from the Innistrad expansion. Now, she appears in the guise of Professor Onyx in the Strixhaven expansion for Magic the Gathering, and the official fiction for that expansion tells us a story about a quest by Professor Onyx for some information related to an ongoing arc of her own storyline as a planeswalker. And several other named professors and deans also appear in official fiction, but the whole story is centered around Liliana Voss in her guise of Professor Onyx. And this is her card from the Strixhaven School of Mages expansion. The artwork for her card is by Kieran Yanner. All right, so what I propose to do this week in terms of introducing the characters out of Magic is I have several slides that focus on each school. And first we start with the deans and then we go to the named professors. And then after we get through those 5 schools, there are several slides of unnamed or unaligned professor cards that come out of these expansions. And in this case, in each of the colleges with the deans, these are the 2 sides of the same two-sided card that is released. So we have Augusta, the Dean of Order, Plarg, the Dean of Chaos. And as you can see, they don't have the same casting costs, require different mana. There are rules about flipping them over, mana cost, and such like that. And then they have ongoing effects to the game once you put them in your deck. The one thing that does seem consistent about these Dean cards is that both sides are painted by the same artist. So in this case, with the Lorehold Deans, the artwork for both sides is painted by Brian Sola. Then we have other Lorehold Professors that are in the expansions, and they also, in some cases, appear in the Strixhaven D&D campaign. So we have Hofri Ghostforge, who is a legendary creature, a dwarf cleric. He is a Lorehold Professor. And we have Loshiel Clockwork Scholar, who is also a legendary creature, an elephant artificer, and that is also a professor that's named in the D&D campaign. And as you can see, these actually come from 2 different expansions. Hofri Ghostforge comes from the Strixhaven School of Mages expansion, artwork by Darkin. Loshio Clockwork Scholar comes from Commander 2021 expansion, artwork by Daniel Zrom. All right, then we have the Prismari Deans. There's Nasari, Dean of Expression, Uvilda, Dean of Perfection. Once again, different stats, different casting costs, and artwork in both cases by Jason Rainville. Then other Prismari professors are Zafai, Thunder Conductor, legendary human shaman, and Varen, Voice of Duality, legendary Ifrit wizard. And the artwork for Zafai is made by Dmitry Burmak. The artwork for Varen is by Matthias Kolros. And these 2 both come out of the Commander 2021 expansion. Then we have the Quandrix teams. There is Ibrahim, Dean of Theory, and Kiani, Dean of Substance. And Ibrahim is a legendary bird wizard. Kiani is a legendary elf druid. And the artwork for both of these is by Brian Sola. Actually, okay. Well, now. Oh, whoops. Sorry. I made a mistake. I didn't update the text here. The artwork on both sides is by Ryan Pancoast. Sorry about that. All right, and Quandrix Professors. We have Dika, the Fractal Theorist, and Andrix and Nev, Twin Casters. Dika is a legendary human wizard. Adrix and Nev are a legendary merfolk wizard. A legendary merfolk wizard. It's weird. It's 2 characters, but it's 1 creature. That's kind of a weird thing that Magic does. All right. So the artwork for Dika is by Donato Giancola. The artwork for Edrix and Nev is Andrew Marr. All right, then we have the Silverquill Deans. We have Shail, Dean of Radiance, and Ambrose, Dean of Shadow. And Shail is a legendary bird cleric. Ambrose is a legendary human warlock. And the artwork for both of them is by Young Guy Choi. Then other professors from Silverquill are Brina the Demagogue and Fane the Broker. Brina the Demagogue being a legendary bird warlock, Fane the Broker being a legendary human warlock. And Brina's art is by Simon Dominic, and Fane's artwork is by Luis Lashahido. And we get a bonus Silverquill Professor, which is Nils the Discipline Enforcer. And he is a legendary human cleric. He's also from the Commander 2021 expansion, and his artwork is by Magali Villeneuve. All right, then we finally come to the Witherbloom Deans. Those are Lizette, Dean of the Root, and Valentin, Dean of the Vein. Now, what's an interesting concept in the D&D campaign is that they changed that around a little bit. They, instead of having Dean of Root and Dean of Vein, they had Dean of Growth and Dean of Decay. But it is the same characters that they reference. So Lisette, Dean of the Root, and or Growth, Valentin, Dean of the Vein, or Decay. Their artwork is by Jesper Ising. And then we have Witherbloom Professors. There's Willow Dusk Essence Seer, who's a legendary Dryad, and Tivash Gloom Summoner, who is a legendary human warlock. And their Willow Dust artwork is by Jesper Ising. Tivash's artwork is by Kieran Yanner. And then we have other Strixhaven faculty. In some cases, these are faculty that are named, but they are not aligned with any specific college, and they don't necessarily appear in the D&D campaign. However, I include these because you should keep them in mind if you want to homebrew anything. You feel free to use these guys as artwork. Uh, feel free to be inspired by the card-like or the card abilities that they have if you want to homebrew abilities for the professors in your game. So, Combat Professor is a bird cleric, and it's from the Strixhaven campaign or Strixhaven expansion. Gnarl Professor is a tree folk druid, also from the Strixhaven expansion. Combat Professor artwork is by Andrei Kuzinski. Gnarl Professor artwork is by Simon Dominic. Then we have the Professor of Symbology and the Professor of Zoomancy. So the Professor of Symbology is a core cleric, and artwork there is by Jason Rainville. Professor of Zoomancy is a bear druid, and artwork there is by Rudy Siswanto. And again, those are both from the primary Strixhaven expansion. Then we have the Strict Proctor and the Tenured Ink Caster. So Strict Proctor is from the Strixhaven expansion. Artwork is by Jokubas Ioangintis, and Tenured Ink Caster is artwork by Jake Murray. And then last but not least, we have, of course, Professor Onyx. We've already seen her card, Planeswalker Liliana, and artwork by Kieran Yanner. All right, So that's a brief look at the cards, and we will see some of those cards again as we go through the slides. But I just wanted to kind of give us a background of that's where they drew from when they created the faculty that appear in the Strixhaven campaign for D&D. All right. There is an implied narrative distinction between deans and professors in each of the 5 Strixhaven colleges, but in the D&D campaign, there's only one stat block shared by deans and professors in each discipline. So for us as DMs that want to logically build a kind of antagonist organization we've been imagining when reskinning the students of Strixhaven, it means we need to get a bit creative, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later when we get to the bit about reskinning. Now, there are a number of professors named in passing in the campaign, and as in the fiction, the action of the story centers around one particular professor. In the case of the D&D campaign, that professor is Augusta, Dean of Order. Augusta has come into possession of a powerful magic item that has a corrupting influence over her, and as the campaign progresses and nears its end, the PCs must confront the Dean and possibly go into combat against her in order to break the corrupting influence that this magic item has over her. So that is how they use the faculty. Otherwise, the faculty appear as uh, sort of NPCs that in some cases they proctor exams, in some cases they're just listed as the professor for the such and such a class that the characters have. And in a couple of cases, they are listed in notes for the DM. It's like, if this particular encounter gets overwhelming, then such and such a professor will come and will basically act like the Deus Ex Machina and bail the characters out of the fight, um, so that you don't wind up with a TPK. And so it's, you know, it's sort of a magical university, so I guess you sort of would anticipate that uh, they're used to magical things getting out of hand, and sometimes the faculty has to intervene. So it sort of makes sense within the context, but it's a little bit kid gloves in terms of holding the hands of the players and not letting them have to deal with consequences of making poor decisions. Um, that's at least in the way that the campaign is written. Your table, your rules. If you want to say that the professors are just going to let the characters be on their own and they're not going to intervene and help, well, then that'll teach the players a lesson maybe about not making stupid decisions when it comes to uh, picking fights with encounters that they really shouldn't. All right. Now, Zephi Thunder Conductor, he is another one of the monsters here. And we get descriptions of the monsters, and we also get sort of some lore about it. So we're going to look on this slide at the descriptions of each of the professors, and then we will look at the lore a little bit later. So each group of faculty is introduced along with the students from their respective colleges. So for Lorehold, you have the Lorehold Professor of Chaos, and Professors of Chaos wield magic inspired by the ebb and flow of chance. Then you also get the Lorehold Professors of Order, and Lorehold's Professors of Order search for evidence of patterns and predictable outcomes in history. Then in the Prismari College, Prismari Professor of Expression, they embody the flair of Prismari magic. Using continuous motion, fluid grace, and interweaving steps, these teachers channel the elements of wind, flame, and lightning to accompany them. Then the Prismari Professors of Perfection combine elemental magic with precise, forceful physical motion. And the Quandrix Professors of Substance specialize in the concrete side of Quandrix philosophy, manipulating physical dimensions and properties of growth. Quandrix Professors of Theory advance the Quandrix philosophy that magical manipulation is most powerful in the abstract dimension of minds, probability, and the fabric of magic itself. And then for Silverquill, the Professors of Radiance call up magic through spoken words and glyphs formed of magically shaped ink and light. And Silverquill's Professors of Shadow wield the linguistic magic of Silverquill College through the slicing wit and debilitating inky shadow. Then Witherbloom Professors of Decay wield magic that drains and twists the essence of the professor's subjects, while Witherbloom Professors of Growth nurture the essence of nature through their magic. All right, and then we have the lore, and the lore is a little more extensive, so I broke each college into its own slide for this. So, Lorehold Professors of Chaos study the course of that history has taken, looking for breaking points in the flow of events, and focus their magic into creating breaks that are to their advantage. Whether those breaks are in a series of events, in obstacles, or in enemies depends on the needs of the moment. They crush enemies' plans under the weight of time and lash out with magical energy that often takes the appearance of books, scrolls, and sheets of parchment. And professors of order study the flow of events, learning which occurrences herald specific outcomes, and they trace their magic through those paths of causality. In their exploration of the ruins, professors of order shore up dangerous structures and find the safest paths as they search. When confronted, they confound their foes by channeling the stasis of perfect order, creating resilient barriers of force and quashing hostile magic. Now, Prismari Professors of Expression, their magic is fast and beautiful, which becomes swift death in battle, mesmerizing in its energetic flow. Devastating lightning strikes and searing lashes of flame meet the professor's foes head on. Professors who embrace the Prismari philosophy of expression focus on magic becoming art in the moment, whether to create a spectacle that an audience will never forget or to strike down their foes in a flash. These teachers impress upon their students the beauty of creation. And Prismari Professors of Expression, their sweeping gestures and dance like steps gather the power of crashing waves, conjure the protection of unyielding stone, and shape great structures of ice. Binding and channeling these natural elements allows the professors to mold their environment to their needs, both for breathtaking performances and to control the fabric of a battlefield against their foes. These teachers stress the attention to fine details, drilling their students on the most minuscule points. The perfect foundation ultimately leads to a flawless work of art, and the professors of perfection produce sculpted and architectural marvels. Now, Quandrix Professors of Substance, their magic alters and replaces the equations that describe the natural world, including creature, space, and substance. Through these manipulations, the professors change their size and the physical form of others, manipulate nature into rapid growth, travel instantaneously, and even fold space into deadly edges. These professors teach that numbers and mathematics aren't merely intellectual concepts, but they exist physically in all things. Professors of substance teach their students to wield magic practically, creating tangible change in the world around them. And Quandrix Professors of theory, their equations shift perceptions in profound ways, alter probability, and interfere with the formation of others' magic. This in battle, the professors tweak probability to impede attacks and strike at the minds of their foes with lancing equations that disrupt the opponent's resolve. Professors of theory hold that altering the way a person interacts with the world can change the world. They impress upon their students to use magic as a tool to shape the overall experience of reality and in turn make the world a better place. Now, what about Silverquill faculty? The Silverquill Professors of Radiance channel radiance to illuminate their allies, bolstering them with encouragement and inspiring any who witness their orations. Professors of Radiance can turn their words into potent assets in battle or strike at their foes with searing radiance. The Silverquill teachers seek to inspire greatness in all that they do, pushing their students to look for the good in all things and bring that into the light. Silverquill Professors of Shadow, whether weaving their magic through the spoken incantations and scathing insults or through shadows, these teachers break down the resolve of their foes. Professors strive to carry themselves as immaculately as possible, seeking to overawe and wrong-foot anyone who would stand against them in debate or in battle. In teaching their students, Professors of Shadow focus on words that find the tiniest, most invisible cracks in an opponent's defenses and break them. And with Witherbloom faculty, the Witherbloom Professors of Decay use the gathered essence to feed their magic, snuffing the life and decaying the bodies of the living, entreating and commanding the dead and undead, and twisting curses around their foes. In battle, they steal the essence of their enemies to heal their own wounds and create spears of sickly green, life draining energy. Witherbloom teachers who espouse the decaying side of the natural cycle instruct their students to exploit the essence of life for their own needs. Professors of Decay unravel the mysteries of death and the transition of decay, and they teach that any life's end is an asset waiting to be tapped. And Witherbloom Professors of Growth brew infusions of plants, fungi, and insects or other minuscule creatures that thrum with the essence of life, using these infusions to fuel their magic instead of using traditional material components. In battle, they flood their allies with vital essence, healing wounds and soothing ailments. Their foes face the wrath of nature itself, from grasping plants and conjured poisonous vines to avatars of nature's wrath. These professors teach their students to focus on the growth side of the natural cycle of life and death and to avoid wasting resources. They espouse the philosophy that a thriving system benefits all. As with the students we've seen in weeks past, all of the professors and deans in the D&D campaign are humanoids. So humanoids are the main peoples of the D&D world, both civilized and savage, including humans and a tremendous variety of other species. And as we said before, every single campaign that they have released, I think including Tyranny of Dragons. Tyranny of Dragons may not have introduced a new playable race, but every single other campaign and almost every other setting source book in D&D 5th edition has expanded the number of playable races. And as long as they keep making D&D 5e stuff, I think that's going to continue. So there will be more and more races that you can play. And almost all of them are humanoids, although in a couple of teases that they've talked about and a couple of things I've seen out of Wizards of the Coast, there are going to be some source books this year that have non-humanoid races, including like one of them that's an ooze. So I'll be very curious to see when that's actually printed, whether your character counts as an ooze or whether your character counts as a humanoid or somehow whether it counts as both. We'll just have to see. All right, now we have the mechanical features of the college professors, not the students, but the professors. As I said, there's no stat block for deans. Regardless of the title, all we get is stat blocks for the professors. So the Lorehold Professors are wizards. You have the Professor of Chaos and the Professor of Order. So Professor of Chaos, armor class 12, 110 hit points. The highest stat is intelligence at a 19. Otherwise, it's a bit above average stat block. Common plus 4 languages. Now, some of these professors do have abilities that a professor might use ahead of time, and some of them cannot be done in battle because of the time it takes. So one of these is contact other plane, which requires a minute to cast. So they're not going to do that in battle. When you're setting up the encounter, if you want that to be relevant to the encounter, then you might have had them already do that and be using knowledge that they have learned, maybe from a voice from the past, uh, contacting the spirit of someone that the uh, PCs faced before. Then there's multi-attack. They have the Spectral Scroll attack, +7 to hit, which is a melee that has a reach of 30 feet. So essentially, it's both a melee and a range attack, and it deals force damage, and also has a chance to knock the target prone. And also Weight of History, which is a recharging attack, can magically compress time around up to 6 creatures, and each creature must succeed on a wisdom save or be restrained for a minute, and they can make that save at the start of each of their turns. And then spell casting a any of the following spells, several cantrips, and then 2 per day each on the more powerful spells. The Professor of Order, similar stat block, similar armor class and hit points. The Voice of the Past ability is there, and then multi attack gets 2 repelling burst attacks, and it can also use Force Barrier if available. So, repelling burst is again a melee attack out to 30 feet that deals force damage. And if you fail a strength check, you are pushed away. And also you become restrained. Then the force barrier magically creates a wall of translucent golden force within 90 feet. It can be vertical or horizontal. Wall provides total color, AC 17, 30 hit points. Then Professor can cast some cantrips and 2 per day at will spells. Also, it can use a reaction for arcane stasis. When a creature Professor can see within 60 feet casts a spell, Professor can magically lock the casting in the moment before completion, and the spellcaster must succeed on DC 15 save using the spell's spellcasting ability, or the spell fails and is wasted. So basically, it's like a counter spell that gives the caster a saving throw in order to overcome it. And they can do that twice per day. All right, then we have the Prismari Professors. A little bit better armor class. This time, the Prismari Professors are sorcerers, so Charisma is the high stat. And their stat block in general is a little bit better than the Lorehold stat block. They have multi-attack. They get Cinder Strike, which deals fire damage. They also have Lightning Flourish, arcs of magical lightning up to 2 creatures within 60 feet. Dex save, or they take damage or half as much damage if they make the save. Then there's a Flaming Leap, allows them to jump up to 30 feet in any direction. When they land, flames are up in a 10-foot radius and then vanish. And so it causes fire damage, and then, of course, the spell casting is there as well. Prismari, Professor of Expression, similar stat block. And then Water Walking, Professor can walk across water and other liquids as if they were solid ground. The multi attack, it gets Tidal Strike attacks, which deal cold damage. and they have spell casting. They get cantrips, they get 2 per day, and they get 1 per day. And the bonus action is Rushing Wave, momentarily surrounded by swirling water and moves up to 30 feet. When the professor moves in 5 feet during the bonus action, creature must make a DC 15 strength save or they're knocked prone and can't take reactions. Alright, then the Quandrix Professors. Professor of Substance is a wizard. Once again, intelligence is the high stat and similar stat block to what we saw with Lorehold. The 2 spatial blade attacks, melee or ranged attacks, and then those deal force damage. Then the dilation is a changing its physical form until it uses this bonus again, or it's incapacitated or dies. Then expand becomes large, contract becomes small. Reactions avoidant translation. When the professor is hit by an attack roll, it can increase its AC by 3 against attacks, potentially causing it to miss. And then we have the Quandrix Professor of Theory. And this is, once again, similar, another wizard. We have multi-attack, heuristic lance. It deals psychic damage, overriding theorem. Has a charm effect. Divide by 0 is a reaction, which is another way of counterspelling that gives the caster a saving throw. All right, then we get to Silverquill, Professor of Radiance, is a bard, and a similar, probably a little bit higher stat block than we've seen in Lorehold or over in Quandrix. The multi-attack Radiant Strike deals radiant damage, and then spellcasting ability, some at will, some 2 per day and 1 per day. Then Silverquill Professor of Shadow, another bard. Devil's Sight, so darkness doesn't impede the professor's dark vision. Multi-dark, professor makes 2 ink lance attacks. Professor can replace one of the attacks with the use of spellcasting. And the ink lance is a melee or ranged spell attack, and it deals necrotic damage. And then again, it has the at will 1 per day, or 2 per day and 1 per day spells that it can cast. All right, and last but not least, we have our Witherbloom. So these are druids, and they have a bit higher armor class, base armor class, I should say, because they are druids. And they have the essence transfer. They can cast Animate Dead using Wisdom as a spellcasting ability. Multi-attack, they make 2 Mortality Spear attacks, which are ranged or melee, 120 feet, necrotic damage. And there's that Essence Pulse, creates life-draining Vortex, which also deals necrotic damage, and then spellcasting. And the Professor of Growth, similar stat block, verdant lash attacks, piercing plus poison damage. The spellcasting is, of course, all druid spells, and Summon Nature's Avatar brings in a Groff, which is one of the creatures that we looked at recently in this series. All right, everyone, now that we have looked at the stat blocks for all of our professors, let's go ahead and talk about how we can use them in the campaign. So if we want to create an encounter with a professor, all of the deans and professors, regardless of their title in the D&D campaign, they all have a CR7 stat block. So for a level 4 party of 5 adventurers, that is a hard encounter, just on the fringe beyond deadly, but still should be manageable by most level 4 parties. Now, a level 5 party, it will be a medium encounter, so if you want to bump it up to a hard encounter, you can throw one of those apprentices that we talked about a couple of weeks ago in there. And then if you want to make it an easy encounter, you can talk about, or you can add a pledge mage. Again, one of the other students that we recently profiled on Monster Monday. Now, if you're a player and your DM throws a college professor at you, first of all, you want to prepare for magic. All these professors are potent spellcasters, and they cover a broad range of casting classes. As we've seen from the D&D stat blocks, you have sorcerers, you have wizards, you have bards, and you have druids. So crank up your resistance. Each professor deals attacks with different energy types, and they can all attack multiple times on their turn. And act fast. Most professors have reaction features, and many of them have powerful abilities that are able to recharge and be used multiple times during combat. Now, if you're behind the screen, you want to plan ahead for several reasons. First reason you want to plan ahead, as we saw with the pledge mages and apprentices, some of the professors have spells or abilities that may be prepped ahead of time depending on the situation. So if the professor anticipates a fight with the PCs, be sure to have them prepared for the fight prior to the party's arrival. Remember your big opener. Now, open the fight with a heavy hitting ability, probably one of the once per day spells or an ability that recharges. And you want to do this to make sure that the PCs know this monster is going to be a challenge before they even finish the first round. And then finally, have an agenda. Remember that all these professors have years of experience, and they all have many layers of plans and contingencies, and perhaps contingencies for their contingencies. So try to plan what the professor will do or say if the fight goes poorly for them, and what contingency they have if they can't achieve their primary objective during the encounter. Now, where are we going to place a college professor in a theoretical campaign? So, as a single opponent, the college professor is a good high tier 1 or low tier 2 challenge for a party. As we saw, level 4, 5, and 6 is kind of the sweet spot for using them. But if the professor is paired with a group of other faculty or students, then the professors can continue to be a challenge well into tier 3 for a party. Within the Strixhaven campaign, there's only one designed encounter against a professor, and that's when the magical artifact in her possession has corrupted Dean Augusta Tullis from Lorehold College. But in your own campaign that's set in the Strixhaven world, or if you take these monsters out of Strixhaven and put them into another setting, they'll likely represent magical artillery or perhaps magical infantry in a varied military force. Otherwise, they could be officer types in an organization that represents the magical antagonist for your party over an entire story arc of your campaign. And this is kind of where we move into reskinning the college faculty. If we look at Strixhaven as a whole, it's a complete society presented to us in a campaign setting. And we have looked at the students, or when we looked at the students, we imagined them as foot soldiers, squad leaders, and street lieutenants in an organized magical opposition that might harry your PCs from level 1 all the way up through higher levels of your campaign. Now, with faculty, we get even more layers of this organization. but in my opinion, we need to make a few tweaks. I'm personally disappointed that Wizards of the Coast did not make separate stat blocks for deans and professors in the D&D campaign. I would want to step up the CR for deans a few notches. Let's say make them 2 or 3 higher. So make them a CR9, CR10 monster, and then give them a larger spell list, have some more combat abilities, bump up their armor class a little bit, and maybe give them a bigger bucket of hit points. And that's how I would distinguish the entitled deans from the professors within the organization. So now going back to this big bad evil antagonistic organization we're looking at, we know that the first year students are the foot soldiers, the apprentices are the squad leaders, the pledge mages are kind of those street lieutenants. Then that means professors would become something like majors or colonels within the organization. Um, and then the deans might become the generals or the underbosses. Then to cap off and lead each of the overall military forces, we could turn to an oracle, which is a monster we'll look at next week, and that could become the boss or the don of each family or each army within the organization. And then sitting above that don as kind of a spiritual leader, maybe the primary driver, motivator, uh, the supreme commander of the whole thing would be a monster that's based on one of the founder dragons. So that those are monsters that are in the CR 21 through 24 range. So that gives you kind of an entire set of layers of organization. And as we look through the campaign, we're probably going to find one or two other monsters that we might even be able to slot in as somewhere within those ranks, either alongside some of the others or maybe even in between some of the layers that we've already created. All right. That is going to do it. There's obviously no Q&A this week because we are pre-recorded. Thank you for joining me for this look at college faculty. I have been DM Galabon, and if you've been with us this far, I'd really love it if you'd go subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, and click the post notification bell so that you get notified every time we post new content. Now, this coming week, we should be getting back on schedule with our streaming because I'm back from vacation. I think we're going to stream on Wednesday night our normal Sword Coast Chronicles. Saturday night, I believe we're getting back to the Saturday Night Greyhawk game. And I think we're on for Sunday with the Walker of Waterdeep game. All of those games stream live over on Twitch. All of the archives for those campaigns is over on YouTube. And there is a Patreon in case you want to help us do a little bit more. Now, next week, we are going to be taking a look at the Oracle of Strixhaven, which we just said was going to be something like kind of the general in our army. So we're going to talk about its stat block, how it's used in the campaign, where it comes from for Magic the Gathering, and how that can inspire us to maybe create a general for our big bad evil organization that's going to be the antagonist for our party. All right. Thanks once again for joining me. Have a wonderful week, and remember, watch out for the monsters under the bed. Good night, everybody.